Hello guys, how are you everyone? Today we explain and review Thrash 2026 full movie. So let's start. Part 1. That would you do if the storm outside wasn't the real danger? Imagine this. A Category 5 hurricane tears through your town. Floodwaters rise. Power is gone. You're trapped, surrounded by darkness. And then, something moves beneath the water. Not debris. Not wreckage, but teeth. This is not just a disaster story. This is survival at its most brutal. Welcome to Thrash 2026. A film where nature doesn't just destroy, it hunts. Thrash is a survival thriller that blends two primal fears: the uncontrollable force of nature and the ancient terror of predators lurking below. Set in a quiet coastal town, the story follows ordinary people forced into extraordinary circumstances as a deadly hurricane floods the streets and invites something far worse into their world. This isn't just about escaping a storm. It's about surviving what the storm brings with it. Studio Microphone, Act 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The story begins in a peaceful coastal town. We meet our main character, a young woman trying to reconnect with her past, her family, and a life she once left behind. There's tension, unresolved emotions, and a sense that something isn't quite right, even before the storm hits. Locals prepare for the incoming hurricane. Some evacuate. Others stay behind, believing they can ride it out, just like they've done before. But this time is different. The weather reports become more urgent. The skies darken faster than expected. Winds pick up with unnatural intensity. And then, the storm arrives. Studio Microphone, Act 2. When nature breaks loose. The hurricane makes landfall with terrifying force. Windows shatter. Roofs collapse. Cars are swept away like toys. Floodwater rushes into homes, trapping families inside. Electricity is gone. Communication is cut off. The town is now isolated. At first, the danger seems obvious. Drowning, debris, structural collapse. But then, something strange happens. A neighbor disappears. No scream. No trace. Just gone. Moments later, blood spreads through the water. That's when they realize they are not alone. Studio Microphone, Act 3. The real horror emerges. As the water rises, so does the terror. Sharks, massive, aggressive, and disoriented, have been carried inland by the storm surge. Now they're swimming through streets, inside homes, in places no predator should ever be. The flooded town becomes a hunting ground. Survivors must move carefully. Every step into the water could be their last. Doors no longer protect them. Walls no longer keep danger out, because the enemy is everywhere. Studio Microphone, Character Focus. Our main character evolves quickly. At the start, she's emotionally distant, carrying guilt and unresolved trauma. But survival forces change. She becomes resourceful, alert, and determined, not just to survive, but to protect others. Alongside her are a small group of survivors. A stubborn father trying to save his family, a young child who doesn't fully understand the danger, a wounded man struggling to stay alive, and others who slowly fall victim to the chaos. Each character represents a different response to fear. Panic. Denial. Courage. Sacrifice. Studio Microphone, Act 4. Survival becomes strategy. Now the story shifts from chaos to survival strategy. The group realizes one thing. Staying still means death. But moving means risk. They begin navigating rooftops, broken structures, and floating debris, trying to avoid the water as much as possible. But the sharks are adapting. They sense vibrations. They strike without warning. One by one, survivors are taken. Not in dramatic, heroic moments, but suddenly, brutally, realistically. This is what makes the film so intense. There's no safety, no predictable pattern. Just survival, moment to moment. Studio Microphone, Key turning point. At the midpoint, a major tragedy hits. A character we've grown attached to is attacked. The scene is silent at first. Just ripples in the water. Then chaos erupts. Screams. Blood. Panic. It's a turning point. From here on, the group understands. This isn't about waiting for rescue. Rescue might never come. They must save themselves. Studio microphone, Act 5, The Escape Plan. The survivors come up with a plan. Reach higher ground outside the flooded zone. But getting there means crossing the most dangerous area. Deep water, limited visibility, and multiple predators. They gather supplies, create makeshift tools, and prepare for one final attempt. This part of the film builds extreme tension. Every movement is slow. Every sound matters. Because one mistake means death. Studio microphone, climax, face to face with death. The final act is pure survival horror. The group moves through the flooded town, one step at a time. Suddenly, a shark attacks. Then another. Panic spreads. The group splits. Our main character is forced underwater. For a moment, everything goes silent. Just darkness and movement in the distance. Then, a sudden strike. She fights back. Not with strength, but with instinct. This is her defining moment. She refuses to give up. Studio microphone. Ending explained. In the end, only a few survive. The storm passes. The water slowly recedes. Rescue teams finally arrive. But the damage is done. The town is destroyed. Lives are lost. And the survivors are changed forever. The final scene is quiet. No music. No dramatic dialogue. Just a look. From someone who has seen death. And lived. Studio microphone. Themes and meaning. Thrash isn't just about sharks or hurricanes. It's about human vulnerability, nature's unpredictability, survival instinct, and the thin line between life and death. The film reminds us, humans are not always in control. Sometimes, we're just trying to survive against forces far greater than us. Studio microphone. Why this movie stands out. Unlike typical shark movies, Thrash doesn't rely only on jump scares. It builds fear through realistic situations, emotional tension, unpredictable danger. The combination of disaster plus predator creates a unique experience. You're not just afraid of what you see, but what you can't see beneath the water. So, next time you see floodwater rising, ask yourself, what's really beneath the surface? Because in Thrash, the storm isn't the worst thing you'll face. It's what comes with it. If you enjoyed this deep breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Now we explain part 2, how they tried to stay alive. Surviving a hurricane is already a nightmare. But what if the floodwater was alive? Not moving, not flowing, but hunting. In Thrash, 2026, survival isn't about waiting for rescue. It's about making the right decision every second. Because one wrong move, and you're gone. Today, we're not just explaining the story. We're breaking down every survival decision. What worked, what failed, and what you should do in a situation like this. Thrash presents one of the most brutal survival scenarios ever imagined. A coastal town is swallowed by a Category 5 hurricane. And with it comes an unexpected predator, sharks, swimming freely through flooded streets. But here's the real question. Did the characters survive because of luck or strategy? Let's analyze. Studio microphone, Phase 1, Pre-storm decisions, first mistake. Before the hurricane even hits, the first survival choices are made. Some residents evacuate early. Others stay behind, underestimating the storm. This is the first critical mistake. In real life, ignoring evacuation orders during a Category 5 hurricane drastically reduces survival chances. In the film, several characters choose to stay because of emotional attachment to home over confidence, lack of preparation. And this decision sets the stage for everything that follows. Backhand index pointing right. Survival lesson number 1. The best way to survive a disaster is to avoid it. Studio microphone, Phase 2, Impact, immediate survival. When the hurricane strikes, chaos begins. Windows break. Water rushes in. People panic. Now survival becomes instinctive. Some characters do the right thing, moving to higher floors, sealing doors and windows, staying together in groups. But others panic and make fatal errors, running into floodwater, separating from others, ignoring structural dangers. Backhand index pointing right. Survival lesson number 2. Height equals safety. Water equals danger. Studio microphone. Phase 3. Unknown threat. The turning point. At first, survivors think the biggest threat is drowning. But then, something changes. People start disappearing. This is where the film introduces a psychological survival factor. Uncertainty. When humans don't understand the threat, they hesitate. And hesitation kills. The moment they realize sharks are in the water, everything changes. Now the environment itself becomes hostile. Backhand index pointing right. Survival lesson number 3. Identify the threat quickly, or become its victim. Studio microphone. Phase 4. Adapting to predator territory. Once sharks are confirmed, survival strategy must evolve. Some characters adapt. Avoid entering water at all costs. Use elevated surfaces like furniture and rooftops. Move slowly to avoid vibrations. Others fail to adapt. Splashing and panicking, making noise, moving blindly through water. Sharks are highly sensitive to movement. And in the film, every splash becomes a signal. Backhand index pointing right. Survival lesson number 4. In predator territory, silence is survival. Studio microphone. Character-based survival analysis. Let's break down how different types of people react. Small Blue Diamond, the leader type, takes control, makes decisions quickly. Higher survival probability. Small Blue Diamond, the panicker, acts emotionally, not logically. Lowest survival chance. Small Blue Diamond, the protector, focuses on saving others, often sacrifices themselves. Small Blue Diamond, the observer, studies the situation before acting, usually survives longer. The film shows that survival isn't about strength. It's about mindset. Studio microphone. Phase 5. Movement strategy. The most dangerous choice. At some point, staying put becomes impossible. The group must move. This is the most dangerous phase. They attempt to cross flooded areas, use floating debris, climb unstable structures. Each movement increases risk. And here's the key issue. They don't have full visibility. They can't see what's below them. Backhand index pointing right. Survival lesson number 5. If you can't see the threat, assume it's there. Studio microphone. Critical mistakes that led to deaths. Let's analyze the biggest survival errors. Crossmark entering water without checking surroundings. Crossmark making sudden movements. Crossmark ignoring group coordination. Crossmark underestimating predator speed. In multiple scenes, characters die not because they're weak, but because they're careless. Studio microphone. Smart moves that saved lives. Now the successful strategies. White heavy checkmark, staying above water whenever possible. White heavy checkmark, using objects as barriers. White heavy checkmark, moving slowly and deliberately. White heavy checkmark, working as a team. One character even uses distraction tactics, creating noise away from the group to redirect danger. That's high-level survival thinking. Studio microphone. Climax. Final survival test. In the final act, the remaining survivors attempt escape. This is where everything they've learned is tested. They move carefully, they communicate silently, they avoid unnecessary risk. But even then, the danger is constant. One mistake still leads to loss. Because in this world, there are no second chances. Studio microphone. Realism check. Could this happen? While extreme, the concept isn't entirely unrealistic. During severe floods, marine animals can be displaced, predators can enter unusual environments. But the film exaggerates this for dramatic effect. Still, the survival principles remain valid. Studio microphone. Psychological survival factor. One of the most underrated aspects of survival is mental control. In Thrash, those who stay calm survive longer. Those who panic die quickly. Fear clouds judgment. Calmness creates strategy. Backhand index pointing right. Survival lesson number 6. Control your mind, or lose your life. Studio microphone. Final outcome. By the end, only a few survive. Not the strongest. Not the fastest. But the smartest. The ones who adapted. The ones who learned. Studio microphone. Key takeaways. If you were in this situation, remember: avoid disaster zones if possible. Stay above water. Identify threats quickly. Move silently. Think before acting. Stay calm under pressure. Survival is not luck. It's decision-making. So the next time you watch a survival movie, don't just watch. Analyze. Because in a real-life situation, your decisions could mean everything. And in Thrash, one wrong move is all it takes. If you want more survival breakdowns like this, hit subscribe and stay ready, because the next story might test your instincts even more.
Now we explain part 3. When the water hunts you. The ocean has rules. You stay on land. It stays in the sea. But what happens when those rules break? When the water rises and brings the ocean with it? In Thrash 2026, the sharks don't just swim. They invade. They adapt. They hunt. And this time, there's nowhere to escape. Isn't just a disaster movie. It's a predator horror experience. Instead of deep ocean terror, the film brings sharks into the most unexpected place imaginable. Your home, your street, your safe zone. This script dives deep into the shark horror aspect of the film. How fear is created, how the sharks are portrayed, why this feels more terrifying than typical shark movies. Studio microphone. Why shark horror works so well. Sharks trigger one of the most primitive human fears. Fear of the unseen. In open water, you can't see below you. Your brain fills the darkness with possibilities. Thrash takes this fear and amplifies it. Now imagine murky floodwater, zero visibility, confined spaces. You're not in the ocean anymore. You're in a place where sharks should not exist. And that's what makes it horrifying. Studio microphone. Breaking the safety illusion. Most people feel safe at home. Walls, doors, familiar surroundings. But in Thrash, that illusion is shattered. Floodwater turns houses into aquatic traps, open hunting zones, death chambers. A living room becomes an ocean. A hallway becomes a feeding path. The film forces you to realize safety is just a condition, not a guarantee. Studio microphone. First shark encounter. Fear begins. The first shark attack is not loud. It's quiet, subtle, a ripple in the water, a sudden absence of someone who was just there. Then, blood. This is where the film excels. It doesn't rush the horror. It builds tension slowly, because what you imagine is always worse than what you see. Studio microphone. Shark behavior in the film. The sharks in Thrash are not mindless monsters. They behave like predators, attracted to movement, sensitive to vibrations, opportunistic hunters. This makes them more realistic and more terrifying. They don't chase constantly. They wait. They observe. And when the moment is right, they strike. Studio microphone. Confined space horror. Most shark movies take place in the ocean. Open space. Escape routes. But Thrash removes all of that. Now imagine you're in a flooded house. Water up to your chest. Behind you, a wall. In front of you, dark water. You hear something move, but you can't see it. This is claustrophobic horror. You're trapped with something that can kill you instantly. Studio microphone. Sound design and fear. One of the most powerful tools in the film is sound. Not music, but natural sounds. Water rippling, sudden splashes, distant movement. Sometimes there's no sound at all. Just silence. And in that silence, your brain expects something terrible. That anticipation is what creates true fear. Studio microphone, the psychology of being hunted. There's a difference between danger and being hunted. In Thrash, characters realize they are not just in danger. They are prey. This changes behavior. Movements become slower, voices become whispers, every decision becomes calculated. The fear is no longer external. It becomes internal, a constant pressure that never goes away. Studio microphone, unexpected attack style. The film avoids predictable horror patterns. There are no obvious warning signs, no dramatic build-up every time. Sometimes, the attack just happens, fast, brutal, final. This unpredictability keeps the audience on edge, because you never know when it will happen next. Studio microphone, visual horror elements. The visuals in Thrash focus on murky water, limited visibility, sudden movement, shock factor, partial glimpses, imagination trigger. You rarely see the full shark clearly. And that's intentional, because fear increases when the mind fills in the gaps. Studio microphone, human versus predator contrast. Humans in the film are slow in water, disoriented, vulnerable. Sharks are fast, silent, perfectly adapted. This contrast creates a sense of helplessness. You're not just in danger, you're outmatched. Studio microphone, key horror moment breakdown. One of the most intense scenes. A character stands still in waist-deep water. They think they're safe. Then, a slight movement, a ripple. Nothing happens. They relax. And in that moment, everything changes. This scene shows a key horror principle. Relief, followed by shock, creates maximum fear. Studio microphone, symbolism of sharks. In Thrash, sharks are more than animals. They represent nature's unpredictability, the illusion of control, hidden dangers beneath calm surfaces. The hurricane destroys the world above. The sharks dominate the world below. Together, they create total chaos. Studio microphone, why this is scarier than typical shark movies. Most shark films rely on jump scares, over-the-top action, unrealistic behavior. But Thrash focuses on realistic fear, psychological tension, environmental horror. You're not just watching attacks. You're feeling the danger. Studio microphone, final horror impact. By the end of the film, the fear doesn't go away, because it taps into something real. The fear of what you can't see and can't control. Even after the water recedes, the memory remains. Studio microphone, conclusion. Thrash proves that horror doesn't need ghosts or monsters. Sometimes all it takes is water, darkness, and something moving beneath you. Because the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's what you don't see. So next time you step into water, think twice. Because in Thrash, you're never really alone. If you enjoyed this horror deep dive, subscribe for more breakdowns. Because the next story might be even darker and even closer than you think. Clapperboard, end of script. Now we explain part 4, fear, instinct, and human nature. When disaster strikes, People don't reveal who they want to be. They reveal who they truly are. In a world flooded by chaos, where death hides beneath every step, who becomes the hero? Who breaks under pressure? And who doesn't make it out at all? This is not just a survival story. This is a story about people, their fears, their choices, and their true nature. Isn't just about hurricanes and sharks. At its core, it's a character-driven survival film. Because while the storm creates the danger, it's human decisions that determine survival. In this breakdown, we'll analyze the main character's transformation, key supporting characters, psychological behavior under extreme stress, and what these characters represent. Studio microphone, main character, the reluctant survivor. At the center of the story is a young woman trying to reconnect with her past. At the beginning, she is emotionally distant, carrying unresolved guilt, avoiding confrontation. She's not a hero. She's just human. But survival changes everything. As the situation worsens, she becomes more alert, starts making decisions, takes responsibility for others. Her arc is clear. From avoidance to action, from fear to leadership. Studio microphone, psychological transformation. What makes her character powerful is realism. She doesn't suddenly become fearless. She hesitates. She doubts. She struggles. But she keeps going. And that's what defines a true survivor. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Studio microphone, the protector, family first. Another key character is the protective parent figure. This character represents responsibility, sacrifice, emotional strength. Their primary goal is not survival for themselves, but survival for their loved ones. This leads to risky decisions, self-sacrifice, emotional conflict. In many ways, this character shows the strongest motivation. Love. Studio microphone, the panicker, fear takes control. Not everyone handles fear well. The film introduces characters who panic under pressure, make irrational decisions, ignore warnings. These characters often move too quickly, make noise, separate from the group, and in a survival situation that leads to consequences. They represent a harsh truth. Fear can be more dangerous than the threat itself. Studio microphone, the observer, versus emotion. There's always one character who watches before acting. This person studies the environment, thinks before moving, notices patterns. They don't rush. They calculate. And because of this, they often survive longer. This character represents logic over emotion, a critical trait in survival situations. Studio microphone, group dynamics, strength and weakness. When people come together under stress, dynamics change. In Thrash, some try to lead, some resist authority, some follow blindly. Conflict emerges. And conflict slows decision-making, but cooperation increases survival chances. The film shows both sides. Unity saves lives. Division costs lives. Studio microphone, trust versus survival instinct. One of the biggest character conflicts is, should you trust others or focus only on yourself? Some characters choose teamwork. Others become selfish. In extreme situations, trust can save you, but blind trust can kill you. This moral dilemma adds depth to the story. Studio microphone, character deaths, meaningful or random. In many films, Deaths are predictable. Not here. In Thrash, good people die. Smart people make mistakes. Survival is not guaranteed. This randomness adds realism, because in real disasters, there are no guarantees. Studio microphone, the child perspective. A younger character in the story represents innocence. They don't fully understand the danger. They ask questions. They trust others. And this creates emotional weight, because survival isn't just physical. It's emotional. Protecting innocence becomes a priority. Studio microphone, the breaking point. Every character reaches a moment where they must choose, fight, or give up. Some rise, some fall. These moments define who they truly are. Studio microphone, leadership under pressure. Leadership in the film is not assigned. It emerges. The main character eventually takes control, not because she wants to, but because she has to. This shows an important truth. Leaders are created in crisis. Studio microphone, human instinct versus logic. Throughout the film, there's a constant battle. Instinct says, run. Logic says, stop and think. Those who follow instinct blindly often fail. Those who balance instinct with logic have a chance. Studio microphone, emotional weight of survival. Surviving isn't the end. It's the beginning of something else. Guilt, loss, trauma. The film doesn't ignore this. It shows that survival comes with a cost. Studio microphone, final character state. By the end, the main character is stronger. The group is smaller. The emotional scars remain. They are not the same people they were before, and they never will be. Studio microphone, themes through characters. Each character represents a theme. Fear versus courage. Selfishness versus sacrifice. Logic versus emotion. Survival versus humanity. Together, they create a complete picture of human behavior under pressure. Thrash is not just about surviving a disaster. It's about understanding people, how they think, how they react, and who they become when everything falls apart. Because, in the end, the real story isn't the storm. It's the people inside it. So, if you were in this situation, who would you be? The leader? The thinker? The panicker? Or the one who doesn't make it? Think about it. Because in a real crisis, your character is your survival. Subscribe for more deep character breakdowns, because the next story might reveal something about you. Now we explain what it really meant. The storm is over. The water is gone. The screams have faded. So why does it still feel like something isn't finished? Because in Thrash 2026, the real ending isn't what you see. It's what you understand. Today, we're breaking down the ending of the film, layer by layer. Not just what happened, but what it truly means. Delivers a brutal survival journey. But its ending is quiet, almost unsettling. There's no dramatic victory, no clear sense of closure. Instead, we get something deeper, a reflection of survival and its cost. Let's analyze it step by step. Studio microphone, final moments recap. As the climax ends, the storm weakens, the floodwater begins to recede, rescue teams finally arrive. Only a few survivors remain. Physically, they made it out, but emotionally, they are completely changed. The final scene focuses on silence. No chaos, no panic, just stillness. And that stillness is powerful. Studio microphone, why the ending feels different. Most survival movies end with celebration, relief, emotional release. But Thrash avoids that. Instead, it shows shock, emptiness, reflection. Because real survival doesn't feel like victory. It feels like loss. Studio microphone, main character's final state. At the beginning of the film, the main character was emotionally distant, avoiding her past, struggling internally. At the end, she is stronger, more aware, but also more burdened. She survived. But survival came at a cost. People she couldn't save. Moments she can't forget. This is called survivor's guilt. Studio microphone, symbolism of the receding water. The water going down represents more than just the end of the flood. It symbolizes the end of chaos, the return to reality, the exposure of truth. When the water is gone, everything is visible again. Damage, loss, reality. Nothing is hidden anymore. Studio microphone, what the sharks represent. Throughout the film, the sharks are a physical threat. But symbolically, they represent hidden dangers, fear beneath the surface, the unpredictability of life. Even when the water disappears, the idea of the sharks remains. Because fear doesn't just vanish, it stays in the mind. Studio microphone, silence as a narrative tool. The ending uses silence instead of dialogue. Why? Because some experiences cannot be explained. They can only be felt. Silence represents shock, emotional exhaustion, unprocessed trauma. It forces the audience to reflect instead of just watching. Studio microphone, unanswered questions. The film intentionally leaves questions. Could more people have been saved? Were the decisions always right? Was survival worth the cost? There are no clear answers. And that's the point. Life doesn't always give closure. Studio microphone, real meaning of survival. In Thrash, survival is not about winning. It's about continuing, living, even after everything is lost. This is a more realistic portrayal of survival. Because in real life, you carry the experience with you. You remember what happened, and you're never the same again. Studio microphone, emotional aftermath. The survivor's face. Trauma, fear of water, nightmares, emotional scars. The film doesn't show all of this directly, but it suggests it. Through expressions, through silence, through atmosphere. Studio microphone, the final look. Why it matters. The last shot of the main character is important. She doesn't smile. She doesn't cry. She just looks. This look represents understanding, acceptance, and quiet pain. It tells us everything without saying anything. Studio microphone, theme. Control is an illusion. One of the biggest messages of the ending is humans are not in control. The storm proves it. The sharks prove it. And survival itself proves it. We plan. We prepare. But sometimes, nature decides everything. Studio microphone, hope or darkness. Is the ending hopeful? Yes and no. Hope exists because some people survived, life continues. But darkness remains because loss is permanent, trauma doesn't disappear. This balance makes the ending powerful. Studio microphone, comparison with typical endings. Unlike typical thrillers, there's no heroic victory, no final defeat of the threat, no clean resolution. Instead, we get realism. And realism is often uncomfortable. Studio microphone, hidden message. The film quietly suggests the real danger isn't just external. It's internal. Fear, guilt, memory. These are things you can't escape, even after survival. Studio microphone, final interpretation. The ending of Thrash tells us, survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one, a life shaped by what you've experienced. Studio microphone. Conclusion. So what really happened at the end? The storm ended. The water disappeared. The sharks were gone. But the impact stayed. Because some things don't leave with the flood. They stay inside you. So if you think survival means everything is okay again, think again. Because in Thrash, the real story begins after you survive. If you enjoyed this ending breakdown, subscribe for more deep explanations. Because sometimes the ending is just the beginning. Now we explain Thrash 2026, hidden meaning and symbolism. What if the storm wasn't the real enemy? What if the sharks weren't just predators? What if everything you saw in Thrash 2026 was actually a metaphor? Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about what's happening outside. They're about what's happening inside. May look like a simple survival thriller on the surface. A hurricane, flooded streets, deadly sharks. But beneath all of that, there's a deeper layer. A layer filled with symbolism, psychological meaning, and hidden messages about human life, fear, and control. In this documentary script, we'll explore the symbolic meaning of the storm, what the sharks truly represent, the psychological journey of the characters, and the hidden message the film leaves behind. Studio microphone. The storm, symbol of chaos. The hurricane in Thrash is not just a natural disaster. It represents loss of control, sudden change, life's unpredictability. At the beginning, everything feels stable. Then suddenly, everything collapses. This mirrors real life. One moment, things are normal. The next, everything changes. The storm is a reminder. Control is temporary. Studio microphone. Floodwater. The subconscious mind. Water has always been a powerful symbol in storytelling. In Thrash, the rising floodwater represents the subconscious, buried fears, hidden emotions. As the water rises, so do the characters' fears. Things they avoided, things they ignored. Now they can't escape them. They are forced to face what's beneath the surface. Studio microphone. Sharks. Fear in its purest form. The sharks are not just physical threats. They symbolize deep-rooted fear, hidden danger, the unknown. You don't always see them, but you know they're there. Just like fear in real life, it exists, even when invisible. And when it strikes, it's sudden. Studio microphone. Why sharks are the perfect symbol. Sharks are ancient predators. They represent something primal, a fear that humans have carried for centuries. In the film, they move silently, attack, unexpectedly appear where they shouldn't be. This makes them a perfect metaphor for unexpected problems in life. Things you don't see coming, but change everything. Studio microphone. The house, illusion of safety. At the beginning, the house represents comfort, security, stability. But once the flood begins, that safety disappears. The house becomes a trap, a confined space, a place of danger. This symbolizes an important truth. What feels safe can become dangerous. Nothing is permanent. Studio microphone. Darkness, lack of clarity. Throughout the film, darkness plays a key role. It represents uncertainty, fear of the unknown, lack of control. Characters can't see what's around them. They don't know what's coming, and that uncertainty creates anxiety. Just like in real life, fear grows in the dark. Studio microphone. The main character, inner transformation. The main character's journey is not just physical. It's psychological. At the start, she avoids her past, she suppresses emotions, she is disconnected. As the story progresses, she faces fear, she takes responsibility, she grows stronger. This represents personal growth. Sometimes, you need chaos to change. Studio microphone. Survival as a metaphor for life. The entire survival journey represents life itself. Unexpected challenges, difficult decisions, loss and pain, growth and change. Every character represents a different way of dealing with life. Panic, denial, courage, logic. And the outcome depends on choices. Studio microphone. Group dynamics. Society in crisis. The group of survivors represents society. When crisis hits, some lead, some follow, some panic, some break. This reflects real-world situations. Disasters reveal human nature. They show who people truly are. Studio microphone. Death. Randomness of life. In Thrash, death is not predictable. Good people die. Strong people fail. This randomness symbolizes life's unpredictability. There's no guarantee, no fairness, just reality. Studio microphone. Silence. Emotional impact. The film uses silence in powerful ways. Silence represents shock, reflection, emotional weight. After chaos, silence feels heavy because it forces you to think, to process, to understand. Studio microphone. The ending. Acceptance. The ending of the film is not about victory. It's about acceptance. The characters accept what they lost, what they experienced, who they have become. This is the final stage of transformation. Studio microphone. Hidden message of the film. At its core, Thrash is telling us, you cannot control everything. Life is unpredictable. Fear is inevitable. But survival depends on how you respond. Studio microphone. Philosophical interpretation. From a deeper perspective, the film explores human vulnerability, the illusion of control, the power of adaptation. It asks a simple question. When everything falls apart, who are you? Studio microphone. Why this film feels real. Even though the situation is extreme, the emotions are real. Fear, loss, hope. These are universal experiences. That's why the story connects with the audience. Studio microphone. Conclusion. Thrash is more than a survival thriller. It's a metaphor for life. The storm represents chaos. The water represents hidden emotions. The sharks represent fear. And the survivors represent us. Thrash. Don't just see the horror. Look deeper. Because the real story is beneath the surface. If you enjoyed this deep analysis, subscribe for more hidden meaning breakdowns. Because sometimes the truth is not what you see. It's what you understand. Now we explain the real science behind sharks and flood disasters. Could this actually happen? A hurricane hits. The city floods. And suddenly, sharks are swimming through the streets. Sounds like pure fiction, right? But what if I told you parts of Thrash 2026 are more realistic than you think? Today, we're separating fact from fiction, breaking down the real science behind hurricanes, floodwater behavior, shark movement, and whether this nightmare scenario could actually happen. Creates a terrifying scenario. A coastal town overwhelmed by a massive storm, where sharks end up hunting in flooded urban areas. But how much of this is scientifically possible? Let's break it down. Studio microphone, Section 1. How hurricanes cause massive flooding. Hurricanes are among the most destructive natural disasters on Earth. They bring intense rainfall, strong winds, storm surges. The most important factor here is storm surge. Storm surge happens when strong winds push ocean water toward land. Sea levels rise dramatically. Coastal areas become submerged. In extreme cases, water can travel miles inland. This is how entire neighborhoods can become underwater. Studio microphone, real-world examples. In real life, we've seen this happen. Flooded large parts of New Orleans, caused catastrophic flooding in Texas. In both cases, streets turned into rivers. Homes were completely submerged. People were trapped for days. So yes, the flooding in Thrash is very realistic. Studio microphone, Section 2. Can sharks enter flooded areas? Now comes the big question. Can sharks actually end up in flooded streets? The answer is yes, but with limitations. Some shark species can tolerate low salinity water. For example, bull sharks are known for entering rivers and freshwater areas. They've been found far inland in river systems, in areas with mixed salt and fresh water. So during extreme flooding, it is possible for sharks to be carried inland. Studio microphone, but here's the reality check. While it's possible, the movie exaggerates the number of sharks, their aggressiveness, their ability to navigate urban environments. In real life, sharks would likely be disoriented. Movement would be limited. Attacks would be rare. So the concept is partly realistic, but highly dramatized. Studio microphone, Section 3. Shark behavior explained. Sharks rely on vibration detection, electrical signals from prey, movement in water. They do not rely heavily on vision in murky water. This means, in flood conditions, they can still detect movement. So if a human is splashing, struggling, moving quickly, they could attract a shark. Studio microphone, why attacks would be unlikely. Despite their reputation, sharks do not prefer humans as prey. Usually attack due to confusion. Often release after a single bite. In a flooded city, food sources would be limited. Sharks would likely be stressed. So continuous attacks like in Thrash are unrealistic. Studio microphone, Section 4. Human survival in flood conditions. Now let's look at the human side. Floodwater is extremely dangerous, even without sharks. It contains debris, contaminants, strong currents. People can be injured by hidden objects, structural collapse, drowning. In real disasters, most deaths happen due to flood-related accidents, not predators. Studio microphone, Section 5. Visibility and danger. Floodwater is usually dirty, dark, full of debris. Visibility is extremely low. This creates disorientation, fear, increased risk. Even without sharks, moving through floodwater is highly dangerous. Studio microphone, Section 6. Psychological effects of disasters. In extreme situations like hurricanes, people experience panic, stress, decision fatigue. This leads to poor judgment, risky behavior, slower reactions. The film captures this aspect very well. Even if the sharks are exaggerated, the human behavior is realistic. Studio microphone, Section 7. Could this scenario really happen? Let's summarize. Heavy checkmark flooded cities, realistic. Heavy checkmark storm surge, realistic. Heavy checkmark sharks entering water, possible. Crossmark large-scale shark attacks, highly unlikely. So the movie is scientifically inspired, but dramatized for horror. Studio microphone. Why it still feels real. Even though some elements are exaggerated, the fear feels real. Because it's based on real disasters, real environments, real human reactions. That's what makes it effective. Studio microphone. Biggest real-life danger. If you were in this situation, the real threats would be drowning, injury from debris, infection from contaminated water, lack of resources. Not sharks, but fear of the unknown can make any situation feel worse. Studio microphone. Final scientific verdict. Thrash takes real science and adds horror elements. It's not completely realistic, but it's not pure fantasy either. It exists somewhere in between. Studio microphone. Conclusion. So could thrash happen in real life? Partially. But the real lesson is this. Nature itself is dangerous enough. You don't need sharks to be in serious danger. So next time you see floodwater, remember, the real threat might not be what you imagine, but what you don't prepare for. Subscribe for more science-based breakdowns, because sometimes the truth behind the story is just as terrifying as the story itself. No, Thrash, 2026. Hurricane Disaster Breakdown, How Nature Became the First Killer. Before the sharks, before the blood in the water, there was the storm, a force so powerful. It didn't just destroy a town, it erased it. In Thrash, 2026, people think the real danger is what's swimming beneath them. But the truth is, the first killer was the hurricane itself. Studio microphone. Introduction is often remembered for its shark horror, but if you look deeper, the true beginning of terror is the natural disaster. Because without the hurricane, nothing else happens. In this documentary breakdown, we'll analyze how the hurricane builds, how destruction unfolds step by step, the realistic disaster elements, and why nature alone is more terrifying than any predator. Studio microphone. Phase 1. Warning signs. Ignored danger. Every disaster begins with a warning. Weather reports start mentioning rising pressure systems, increasing wind speeds, potential landfall. Authorities issue evacuation alerts. But here's the critical mistake. Not everyone listens. Some people underestimate the storm, trust past experiences, choose to stay behind. This is the first failure. Backhand index pointing right. Disaster lesson number 1. Ignoring early warnings is the most dangerous decision. Studio microphone. Phase 2. Storm formation, power builds. Hurricanes don't appear instantly. They grow. Warm ocean water fuels them. Wind patterns strengthen them. And as they move toward land, they become unstoppable. By the time the storm in Thrash reaches the town, it's already too late. No one can stop it, only survive it. Studio microphone. Phase 3. Landfall, destruction begins. The moment the hurricane hits, everything changes. Winds tear through buildings. Windows explode. Roofs collapse. The environment becomes violent. Even stepping outside becomes deadly. This phase shows raw, uncontrollable power. No strategy, no defense, just survival. Studio microphone, Phase 4. Storm surge, the real disaster. The most destructive element isn't the wind. It's the water. Storm surge pushes massive amounts of ocean water inland. Suddenly, streets disappear. Houses fill with water. Escape routes vanish. The town transforms into a flood zone. This is the turning point, because now, the environment itself becomes lethal. Studio microphone, real-world comparison. Events like show how devastating storm surge can be. Entire cities can be submerged. And once flooding begins, rescue becomes extremely difficult. Studio microphone, Phase 5. Isolation, no escape. After the storm hits, power goes out. Communication fails. Emergency services are overwhelmed. People are completely isolated. No help. No guidance. This creates fear, confusion, desperation, and desperation leads to mistakes. Studio microphone, Phase 6. Structural collapse. Buildings are not designed for flood conditions. Water weakens. Foundations, walls, support systems. In the film, houses begin to break apart. Debris floats everywhere. Safe zones disappear. Even staying inside becomes dangerous. Studio microphone, Phase 7. Human error in disaster. One of the most realistic elements in Thrash is human behavior. People panic, make rushed decisions, ignore logical choices. Some try to escape too late. Some move into unsafe areas. Some separate from others. Backhand index pointing right. Disaster lesson number 2. In chaos, clear thinking is survival. Studio microphone, Phase 8. Environmental hazards. Floodwater is not just water. It contains sharp debris, chemicals, broken infrastructure. This makes movement extremely risky. In many cases, people get injured before they even realize the danger. Studio microphone, Phase 9. The perfect setup for horror. By this point in the film, the town is flooded. People are trapped. Visibility is low. Escape routes are gone. This is when the second threat appears. The sharks. But here's the key idea. The hurricane created the perfect environment for them. Without the storm, there is no horror. Studio microphone, nature versus humanity. The film highlights a powerful theme. Humans believe they control their environment, but in reality, nature decides everything. The hurricane proves. Infrastructure can fail. Plans can collapse. Safety can disappear instantly. Studio microphone, psychological impact of disaster. Natural disasters don't just affect the body. They affect the mind. Characters experience fear, shock, decision paralysis. This makes survival even harder, because mental strength becomes just as important as physical safety. Studio microphone, why the hurricane is the true villain. While sharks are the visible threat, the hurricane is the real cause. It creates the environment, traps the victims, removes all control. It doesn't hunt, but it kills indirectly. Studio microphone, lessons from the disaster. From a real-world perspective, the film teaches. Always respect evacuation orders. Prepare early. Avoid floodwater. Stay informed. Think before acting. Because in real disasters, preparation saves lives. Studio microphone, Final reflection. By the end of Thrash, the storm passes, the water recedes, but the damage remains. The sharks may be gone, but the destruction caused by the hurricane stays. Studio microphone. Conclusion. Thrash reminds us of a simple truth. Nature doesn't need monsters to be terrifying, because sometimes the storm itself is enough. So the next time you hear a hurricane warning, don't ignore it, because in Thrash, the real horror didn't start with sharks. It started with a storm. Subscribe for more disaster breakdowns, because understanding danger is the first step to surviving it. Now we explain Part 9 of Thrash, 2026. Psychological horror breakdown. Fear lives inside you. What if the real horror wasn't the storm? What if it wasn't the sharks either? What if the most dangerous thing in Thrash, 2026, was the human mind? Because sometimes you don't die from what's outside. You break from what's inside. Studio microphone. Introduction. Is often seen as a survival thriller, but beneath the surface, it functions as a psychological horror film. Yes, there's a hurricane. Yes, there are sharks. But the real terror comes from fear, uncertainty, isolation, and the human response to extreme stress. In this script, we'll explore how the film turns the human mind into its most powerful horror element. Studio microphone. Fear of the unknown. The strongest fear in Thrash is not what characters see. It's what they can't see. Murky water, low visibility, uncertain danger. The brain reacts by imagining the worst. And often, the imagination is more terrifying than reality. This creates constant tension. Even when nothing is happening, fear is present. Studio microphone. Isolation. Cut off from the world. One of the key psychological triggers in the film is isolation. After the storm hits, communication systems fail. No outside help is available. Survivors are trapped. This creates a feeling of being completely alone. And when humans feel isolated, fear increases dramatically. Studio microphone. Loss of control. Humans need control to feel safe. In Thrash, that control is taken away. The environment is unpredictable. The danger is invisible. The future is uncertain. This leads to anxiety. Because when you can't control your surroundings, your mind starts to panic. Studio microphone. Panic versus logic. The film shows two types of mental responses. Small blue diamond panic. Small blue diamond control. Panicked characters act impulsively, make noise, take unnecessary risks. Controlled characters think before acting, move carefully, analyze the situation. The difference. Survival. Studio microphone. Claustrophobic fear. Even though the setting is flooded and open, it feels closed. Why? Because characters are trapped. Inside houses, on rooftops, in limited spaces. They cannot move freely. This creates claustrophobia, a fear of being trapped with no escape. Studio microphone. The sound of fear. Psychological horror is often built through sound. In Thrash, silence becomes uncomfortable. Small noises feel amplified. Water sounds trigger anxiety. A simple ripple can create panic, because the mind connects it to danger. Studio microphone. Anticipation. Waiting for death. One of the most intense feelings in the film is anticipation. Characters often stand still, listen carefully, wait, and in that waiting, fear grows, because they know something might happen, but they don't know when. This creates constant tension. Studio microphone. Group psychology. When people are in groups during crisis, emotions spread quickly. Panic becomes contagious. Decisions become chaotic. In Thrash, one person's fear can affect everyone. This shows how fragile group stability is under pressure. Studio microphone. Mental breakdown moments. Some characters reach a breaking point. They lose control, stop thinking clearly, give in to fear. These moments are important because they show survival is not just physical, it's mental. Studio microphone. Survivor's guilt. Even after surviving, the psychological horror continues. Characters experience guilt for surviving, regret for lost lives, trauma from what they saw. This is known as survivor's guilt, and it can last a lifetime. Studio microphone. The mind as the real battlefield. In Thrash, the environment is dangerous, but the real battle happens inside the mind. Fear versus control. Panic versus logic. Hope versus despair. Those who win this battle have a chance to survive. Studio microphone. Why psychological horror is stronger. Physical horror shocks you. Psychological horror stays with you because it connects to real human emotions. Even after the movie ends, the feeling remains. Studio microphone. Hidden fear trigger. The film taps into a deep human fear. Loss of certainty. We want to know what's happening, what will happen next, how to stay safe. When that certainty is gone, fear takes over. Studio microphone. Final psychological state. By the end of the film, survivors are mentally exhausted, emotionally damaged, forever changed. They escaped physically, but mentally the experience stays. Studio microphone. Real-life connection. The psychological reactions in the film are realistic. In real disasters, people experience shock, anxiety, trauma. The movie reflects this accurately. Studio microphone. Conclusion. Thrash is more than a survival story. It's a psychological journey, a story about how fear works, how the mind reacts, and how survival depends on mental strength. So the next time you feel afraid, ask yourself, is the danger real, or is it your mind? Because in Thrash, the scariest place isn't the water, it's inside your head. Subscribe for more psychological breakdowns, because understanding fear might be the only way to control it. Now we explain Part 10 Thrash, 2026. What if alternate ending explained? What if everything didn't end the way you saw? What if one decision, just one, changed the entire story of Thrash, 2026? Because in survival situations, there is no single outcome, only possibilities. And today, we're exploring the darkest one. Studio microphone. Introduction gives us a realistic, grounded ending. Some survive, some don't. The storm passes. But what if the story went differently? In this alternate version, we reimagine key decisions, critical moments, and how everything could have gone wrong. This is not just a different ending. It's a deeper look into how fragile survival really is. Studio microphone. Point of divergence. The one change. Every alternate story begins with a single change. In this version, the group makes one critical mistake. They leave their safe position too early. In the original story, timing was everything. But here, they miscalculate, and that decision changes everything. Studio microphone, Act 1, premature movement. As the flood rises, tension builds. Instead of waiting for the storm to weaken, the group decides to move immediately. Why? Fear of rising water, panic, lack of patience. At first, it seems like the right choice. But in survival, timing is everything. Studio microphone, Act 2, entering maximum danger. Because they move early, water levels are higher, visibility is worse, the environment is more unstable. They enter the most dangerous phase of the disaster. Debris moves faster. Currents are stronger. And worst of all, the predators are more active. Studio microphone, Act 3, early losses. The first major difference. Deaths happen sooner. A character who survived in the original story doesn't make it here. The attack is sudden. No warning. No build-up. This immediately changes group dynamics. Fear increases. Confidence drops. Studio microphone. Psychological collapse begins. With early losses, trust weakens, panic spreads, decision-making breaks down. The group starts to divide. Some want to go back. Others push forward. This conflict slows them down. And in a dangerous environment, delay is deadly. Studio microphone, Act 4, fragmentation of the group. Instead of staying together, the group splits. This is the worst possible outcome, because smaller groups are more vulnerable, communication is lost, coordination disappears. Each subgroup now faces the danger alone. Studio microphone, individual survival stories. Now the film shifts into multiple survival paths. Small Blue Diamond, one character tries to return to safety. Small Blue Diamond, another continues forward alone. Small Blue Diamond, others get trapped in isolated locations. Each story becomes more desperate, more intense, more tragic. Studio microphone, Act 5, escalation of horror. Because the group is divided, rescue becomes impossible, help cannot reach everyone, mistakes increase. The predators take advantage of isolation. One by one, characters fall. Not heroically, but realistically. Studio microphone, the main character's dark path. In this alternate version, even the main character struggles more. Without strong group support, she hesitates more, makes riskier choices, faces danger alone. Her survival becomes uncertain. Studio microphone, climax, no perfect escape. In the original story, there was a final escape attempt. Here, there is no coordinated plan. Each survivor acts individually, and that leads to chaos. Instead of one final push, we see multiple failed attempts. Studio microphone, alternate ending, a darker outcome. The storm eventually passes, but the difference is clear. Fewer survivors, more loss, more unanswered stories. Rescue teams arrive, but too late for most. Studio microphone, final scene, a bleaker reality. The final scene is not hopeful. It's heavy. Instead of quiet reflection, there is emptiness. The main character survives, but barely, and the look in her eyes is different. Not just pain, but regret. Studio microphone, what this ending means. This alternate version highlights a key truth. Survival depends on decisions. One wrong choice can change everything. Studio microphone, theme. Timing is survival. The biggest lesson here is timing matters. Moving too early, danger. Moving too late, danger. The right moment is everything. Studio microphone, comparison with original ending. Original ending, coordinated survival, fewer losses, balanced outcome. Alternate ending. Chaos fragmentation higher death rate. This contrast shows how fragile survival is. Studio microphone. Philosophical question. The film now asks, is survival skill or luck? Because even smart decisions can fail under pressure. Studio microphone. Why this version feels darker? Because it removes hope. It shows what happens when fear overrides logic, panic replaces planning, unity breaks. This is a more brutal reality. Studio microphone. Conclusion. Thrash could have ended very differently, and this alternate version proves it, because in survival, there are no guarantees, only choices. So if you were there, would you wait or move? Because in Thrash, one decision can be the difference between life and death. Subscribe for more alternate story breakdowns, because sometimes the version you didn't see is the one that changes everything. This is when the first unexplained disappearance happens. At this point, the characters still believe the danger is just the flood. Studio microphone. Day 4, midday. First shark encounter. The timeline shifts dramatically. A character disappears in floodwater. Moments later, blood appears, panic begins. This is the moment when the true threat is revealed. Sharks have entered the flooded area. Studio microphone. Day 4, afternoon. Realization phase. Survivors begin to understand. The water is no longer safe, movement is extremely risky, they are being hunted. Behavior changes immediately. Less movement, lower noise, increased caution. Studio microphone. Day 4, evening. First major losses. As fear increases, mistakes happen. Timeline of events. A character panics, makes sudden movement, attracts a predator. Result: a sudden attack. This is the first major loss. It changes the entire tone of the group. Studio microphone. Day 4, night. Survival mode activated. By nightfall, the storm is still active, the water is deeper, visibility is almost zero. Survivors stop thinking about rescue. Now it's about immediate survival. They move to higher ground and avoid water at all costs. Studio microphone. Day 5, early morning. Strategy phase. The storm begins to weaken, but the danger remains. Survivors develop a plan. Move toward higher ground, avoid open water, stay together. This is the first organized survival strategy. Studio microphone. Day 5, midday. Movement attempt. The group begins moving. Timeline. Step-by-step movement across debris, use of elevated surfaces, constant observation. But movement increases risk. Another attack occurs. More losses. Studio microphone. Day 5, afternoon. Critical turning point. The group realizes staying is no longer safe. They must leave the flooded zone. But the path ahead is dangerous. This creates tension between risk of moving, risk of staying. Studio microphone. Day 5.